Hey, welcome to episode 224 of Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Freeman. Today's episode is called Beyond What We Do. And it's designed to celebrate the vastness we all have within us. None of us are any one thing. We wear many hats and have many experiences in life. But sometimes in our conversations with people, or even in how we think of ourselves, we just think of a few aspects of who we are. So I'm going to tell you more about my amazing guest today. But first, this. First, this. I guess I'm doing the little first this dance. That's new. First this. Okay.
Today's guest, David Tollefson.
Hey, welcome back to Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. I am still your host, Jason Freeman, and I still have a lovely speech impediment. So let me tell you about David. I met David at a conference in Sioux Falls last fall. He introduced himself as an engineer, and we started talking about his work. But I have to be honest, even after talking with him for a while, and then again in recent months about his job, I'm still hard pressed to explain it. I don't get what he does exactly, but I know what he does that is important. Okay, this is my best explanation. David engineers various control setups for the food processing industry that keep things running safely and efficiently, which is deeply important to all of us who like to eat. So basically, David is one of the many unsung heroes behind the scenes of our lives. Fortunately, towards the end of our initial conversation, we broke the one-dimensional what we do wall. Somehow we got to talking about our families and discovered that both of our mother's families are from the St. Cloud, Minnesota area. Yay, from Minnesota. Then David's like, oh, by the way, I participated in the thing called Drum Corps, where I traveled around the United States for 2 years, taking part in drumming competitions. And oh, by the way, I've been to all 48 of the contiguous states in the United States. Some months later, I met with David over Zoom and found out that he also teaches yoga and learned about some other fascinating dimensions of his life. And I'm excited to learn more about more dimensions today. We are all really vast people. Please welcome to our Awkwardly Podcast. Say the name of your podcast right, Jason. Take two. Please, no. Please welcome to Awkwardly Awesome Podcast, David Tollefson, David T. Please welcome David T. Hey, David.
Hey, Jason, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, we've had a little bit of a haircut and a trim since the last picture, but it's, what do they say? New year, new me, all that.
Wonderful, wonderful. So just for the record, how do you say your last name?
Tollefson. Yeah, getting in touch with my Scandinavian roots, son of Tollef. Yeah, that isn't that fun.
Son of Tollef.
Or just Tollef's son. Yeah, I feel like that's pretty common around here in the Midwest. You get a lot of, I think I'm predominantly German, Irish, Norwegian, Scandinavian. Yeah, just a kind of a European mix there.
So I want to start us off in a place that you're not expecting, because you've done something that no other of my podcast guests have done so far. I asked you to write out a little something about the vastness of your life and your different interests, and I thought maybe you would come up with 4 or 5 or 6 things, but actually you came up with this amazing, like, 2-page document that's just so wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. It's what do they say, when you're turning a new chapter in your life, sometimes you examine the old chapters and dust off some old experiences that admittedly I'd kind of forgotten I'd even had. So it was a beautiful ritual. Thanks for sending that my way.
So speaking of old experiences, what did you learn about life from working at handyman?
Oh yeah, that's yeah, small chapter in my early life. I felt like that was kind of a college time job for me, if you will, during the summer, and then starting at USD at Vermilion, and then transitioning to the University Center in Sioux Falls. It's just a little bit more going on in Sioux Falls, and I have family in Sioux Falls and what have you. So that was a very early sales experience for me.
First of all, will you briefly tell people what handyman is?
Oh, sure. So yeah, it was an old family friend, the Swensons, and a longtime client of my father's, who's always worked in radio advertising and
Mm,
creative ad writing and what have you.
mm,
If
mm.
anything, I actually went hunting for the first time, shot my first deer with Steve. So it's a small world how all of that works. But yeah, working there, it was an early experience towards sales and almost more that slightly technical aspect of things, certain dimensions when it came to cabinetry, specifications. Obviously, it was a little bit more of like a hardware superstore. So that gets into some of the plumbing and a lot of people doing home remodeling, which is even more interesting now. It's funny connecting those dots going backwards, because now I'm looking more into the real estate market and maybe property management and these types of things. And so all of those little things you pick up along the way end up being pretty valuable over time. And yeah, I might need to reach out to them even to ask some questions when it comes to renovations and what have you. So an interesting early on experience. I think I worked there for a year or two, like I said, when I was an early college student, probably around 20 years old or so.
A great many people are intimidated by the idea of being in sales. What's one thing you could say to reassure people about what sales is?
I think it always comes down to communication and connection. I
Mm,
think that the older I get, the less I draw those hard lines between personal and professional. I feel like it's all just connecting with people.
mm,
Um, how would I put it? We used to say like earning the right to actually even make a sale. If I know nothing about you, how can I advise a solution to something you're dealing with? So just learning as much as you can about people, whether that's through probing questions. What do they say? You have 2 ears and one mouth for a reason, trying to listen as much as possible and just create an open dialogue, build that rapport with people. What do they say? Even if you're not in a sales field, we're all to a degree selling something when it comes to kind of Western economies and what have you. We're all we have a product or a service or what have you, and it's a matter of making that desirable, creating value through that, and just being able to market it appropriately. And I think to get back to it, communication and connection is key. I think we're all just human beings making our way in this world. And
Mm.
I love striking up conversations with people and finding what you have in common, especially in the Midwest. I feel like it's usually only 2 or 3 degrees of separation. And I think that can be beautiful, kind of the everybody knows everybody conversation. And I've lived in some bigger cities before and what have you, some metropolitan areas. And I did find myself drawn back to this area for that reason, just value system and just the warm people and that connection.
So another thing I didn't know about you, and I shouldn't be surprised, like this is a third actual face-to-face conversation we've had in our lives. So there's all sorts of things I don't know about you, but you said in the document that you play football and basketball. No, cancel that you play football and baseball. What did you learn about high performance from playing football?
Yeah, it was mostly as a younger person, more like the middle school, early high school age, because admittedly, once I got into high school, I was kind of baptized by the fires of drumline, and then that just took over my life, which was beautiful. It really formed my inner circle. And but what I learned in those early activities, other than just trying to have fun and knowing your strengths and weaknesses, I think there's a reason I didn't stick with it long term because it was a lot of fun, but there were people where I was looking at them and saying, "Oh, this person really they could go get a scholarship with this." I didn't necessarily feel like that was me. So it was more just the fun of it and staying physically active, but especially at that young age, just
Especially at the young age,
there we go.
David?
Yep, I'm here. Sorry, I think we had a little hiccup there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, it was just a time in my life to stay physically active. I had some friends in football and in baseball, so that's admittedly the big thing. It was a social outlet. And then again, once I got into high school, I was even in music performance before, orchestra, chorus, and percussion through band and what have you. But once I got into high school, it just took over my life. Like I said, it was a blessing. Private drum lines outside of school, Lincoln High School drumline in Sioux Falls here, touring for parades and going to the Macy's Day Parade in New York City. And all of that just aligned with performance, whether it's music performance, and you could, again, connect those dots going backwards, and whether it's a hard work ethic, practicing how you perform. What do they say? They say practice makes perfect. And I disagree. I think perfect practice makes perfect. How you're practicing is how you're going to perform, and trying to emulate those, how would I put it, those confines, that system. Because when you are in a performance setup, I think you're always going to have adrenaline, nervous energy, things like that. So I think it is really important to be able to kind of expose yourself as far as setting up almost mock performances, whether that's for family or whether, band parents at in Lincoln High School band and what have you, and then on to drum corps, going to audition camps and what have you, and traveling all over the country. And I think that's what it taught me, is just that almost performance psychology. And I think you can apply that to every aspect of your life, whether you're sitting down to have a conversation over a podcast, or whether you're throwing a football or playing a piece of music in front of a large audience or a stadium. I think it's all the connective tissue.
I can attest to that you prepare you prepare so much for this podcast. It's really wonderful. Thank you. What what do you mean by the term perfect performance?
Yeah, that phrase, perfect practice makes perfect.
Yeah, perfect practice.
Yeah. Well, because that's always like an old adage, which is, practice makes perfect. But I think because you perform how you practice, technically, if you want to perform perfectly, perfect practice makes perfect. So, like I said, almost setting yourself up for success by, if that's why you're practicing, treating it like a performance, almost upping the ante, or raising that level of fidelity to the experience or what have you, by treating it like you will on the day when you are actually performing. And a good example of that, again, is in drumline or drum corps or what have you, having almost these mock shows, these early shows before you actually go travel and tour, and the adrenaline's pumping, and you're basically trying to make it as similar to the performance as you can. So that way you're isolating. I think that's what it really comes down to, is isolating as many variables as possible. So there's less variance in the system. You're able to say, well, I've accounted for all these things, maybe even accounted for some of that nervous energy or adrenaline, and being consistent at saying, I want to give 100% on the day. I might feel like giving 120, but that might be overdoing it and admittedly getting in the way. So trying to, if anything, at times raise the energy when you need to, and maybe even tempering it when you're feeling too much of that energy. So whether that's, again, in musical performance or other athleticism, like we talked about, like, and maybe we'll get into it, but like yoga or Brazilian jiu-jitsu or what have you, I feel like it's, whether you're teaching a class or being led in a class, I feel like it's trying to, again, emulate those variables, so that way you're not surprised when it actually comes to performing on the spot. And again, we could even apply that to professionalism. The fact of whether it's giving a presentation, I had to do that recently for work. And again, I feel like preparation is so much of it. By the time you've actually showed up on the day, in my opinion, the bulk of the work has already been done. And then it's kind of like taking a test. As long as you've prepared yourself appropriately, it's a matter of just letting your preparation and the skill that you've acquired shine through, almost to a degree, getting out of the way. And I feel like that resonates in so many areas of my life.
So the term perfect practice, I can see myself wanting to do a perfect practice, but then the first time I made a mistake in that practice, I would be like, oh my gosh, this is not perfect. So how do you deal with the mistakes that are a part and parcel with practice?
I appreciate that. I think that's a great question. And what it makes me think of is just the iterative approach. You're always just trying to be better than you were the previous day, or the previous performance, or the previous repetition, or what have you. Not necessarily comparing yourself to others. Sometimes that can be helpful, but most importantly, just comparing yourself to where you've been and where you want to be going, and trying to just keep that upward momentum, that trajectory, overcoming inertia, and just, getting that momentum going. And the more you do, the easier it is to do, and the more you want to do. So that's what comes to mind. And to not be discouraged, I appreciate you highlighting that. It almost reminds me of a touch of like ancient philosophy and stoicism and things like that. The idea that having a North Star or a compass pointing north that you're navigating by. And sometimes you're going to have to adjust the path. You're going to have to step around rocks. You might have to make some micro or some macro adjustments, but the goal ultimately being that I'm calibrating by this value system, and I'm going to continue in that direction. Whether, again, that's in low points or in high points, kind of tempering yourself more to that baseline where I think we can be a little bit more consistent. I'm full of these little phrases, but it reminds me of the conversation. People say that most often people do not rise to the occasion, they fall to their standard. So I think the goal is to just raise your standard incrementally, one day at a time, 1 percentage point at a time. And I think that that consistency, that integrity adds up over time, and it's a rising tide. It just hopefully increases the base level for every aspect of your life, let alone something performance-based.
So the idea of perfect practice, the idea of perfect becomes the North Star that you're aligning your practice to.
Sure.
It becomes an aspiration.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's important as well. As you hear the phrase, to not let perfect be the enemy of good. I think that sometimes people will look at things in a very daily basis, and day 1, 2, 3. And if I really messed up on day 1, well, then who cares about day 2 or 3? And I think sometimes it's reining that in by saying maybe it's not daily productivity, but weekly or monthly productivity. I feel like there's times in my life where there's seasons for everything, we're slowly coming out of winter, and I'm so excited for getting outdoors and hiking and camping and all these types of things. And I think that's important, is there are times for rest, and then there are times for, I've always felt I've been a bit more of a sprinter at times. So times to rest and prepare, and then times to leap and take those opportunities and answer the phone when it rings, and the door when someone's knocking. And yeah, that just really resonates with me the older I get, which is to be, how would I put it, almost gentle and graceful with yourself, because we're not always going to be perfect. We will have exceptional days, and a lot of the times we won't. But again, that's the goal, is to just generally raise that standard, that kind of North Star concept that we resonated on, to just try to slowly better the system as a whole, holistically, literally in all pieces and parts.
So, holistically in all pieces and parts. As you talk about this, the image of a drill sergeant, like demanding practice and being so tough and unforgiving comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't sound like at all what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it also, I think there's just such a broad spectrum and bandwidth of humanity we kind of touched on in some of our preparative meetings here and what have you, is some people that really works. You have almost like the David Gogginses out there who say, like, you just really need to embrace the thing that's hard and don't try to make it fun for yourself, and build that mental toughness. And maybe that works for some people. For others, maybe it's a matter of turning it into a labor of love. So maybe that's, oh, I have a task I don't really like doing, so what will I do? I'll listen to music I really enjoy, or I'll try to do that task outside if I can, because I really enjoy being in the sun or in nature or what have you. Trying to blend those two worlds. I think so much of it is just conditioning. And I think a lot of that, the more I've looked into neurological processes and what have you, I think it comes down to dopamine conditioning. And so counting your wins and giving yourself a pat on the back, and not being too hard on yourself when it comes to your shortcomings or your faults, and ultimately trying to be constructive about that, saying, okay, well, if I didn't do this very well, what is the data that I can bring back to the drawing board and understand how to do it better the next time? And it is that iterative approach, just trying to be better every day. And maybe it doesn't exactly look like a trajectory like this. Maybe there's dips and some peaks, and then, almost like with investing in the stock market or what have you, it's like, it's not always going to be perfectly up every day. It might be down and up and what have you, but the goal is the trending trajectory to be better over time, and ultimately yourself day by day, especially week, monthly, certainly annually after this new year, taking stock of the previous year and what I'd like for the new year. I think that's the goal, is just that upward trajectory, onward and upward, just better things on the horizon, and just trying to improve every day.
It's a brilliant point that we do motivate and inspire ourselves differently. Some people resonate with more drill sergeant style motivations. Some people resonate with more labor of love motivation, and neither is right or wrong. I guess it's what works for the individual.
Absolutely. I think that's the beautiful, just kind of broad spectrum of humanity, is that it takes all different sorts and all different types. The older I get, I think it's just about examining yourself and understanding your own tendencies and preferences, and maybe proclivities or what have you, and just being able to navigate better. And I think a lot of that comes down to just being honest and realistic with yourself. I think there is a lot of virtue in pushing yourself to grow. What do they say? Don't ask for a light load, ask for a strong back. To grow to the opportunities you have, to the things that you have going on for you in your personal life, maybe professionally as well, and blending those two areas. And I think that's just the goal ultimately, is just to be better incrementally over time. And like I said, it might not be better every single day. Maybe there's seasons for rest and preparation, and seasons for tackling all of those opportunities at once. I mean, we're literally seasonal beings. We have the slow winter, and then we have the fast-paced summer and what have you. And so I think it's about being realistic with yourself, being honest with yourself, but also idealistic to the point of pressing yourself to do more and do better if that's what you want. It really just, I think, comes down to your value system. Being able to align yourself with your priorities and that iterative approach of adjusting that over time, and just I don't know, getting some quiet time to get to know yourself, some of that soul searching, asking yourself, what do I really want? And I think process of elimination is an important tool as well. The more experience you have, the more you're able to say less of this, but more of this. And so maybe you don't have a perfect answer, but you're able to just slowly hone in on something that is closer to your preferences, to your aptitudes, to your love language, to the things that you enjoy doing, and just pursuing that. What do they say? Follow your bliss. If you have passion and love for something, I think that can conquer quite a bit. Being able to persevere and be consistent, I think most often beats talent, though obviously it's a combination of those things. And just playing to your strengths and trying to shore up some of your maybe perceived weaknesses, and just trying to optimize and better this existence. Ideally, that conversation of, iron sharpens iron, finding people that make you want to be better and that better you, and kind of creating that circle, if you will. I think the older I get, the more that resonates with me as well, is just wanting to find people who are interested in a can-do attitude as opposed to a can't-do. I'm usually not consoled by having a laundry list of reasons why I can't do something. I would just rather have a short list of maybe one or two reasons why maybe I could, and then pursuing that. But again, everybody's different, and I certainly didn't feel that way about things maybe 10 years ago. It's just growing and living and learning. I think that's ultimately the goal, is to be a lifelong learner, to have this fluid existence where maybe, like we said, you have certain things that you're setting your sail by, your North Star, your value system, what have you, but being able to admit when you're wrong, maybe when you have new data or new information, or being able to embrace when you've maybe been misinformed in the past, and then just recalibrating that value system as needed. And maybe it's not macro adjustments. Maybe it is when you're younger. The older I get, I find it's just a little bit more micro adjustments to get us closer to that North Star idea.
What have you learned about practice from volunteering for the Special Olympics?
Absolutely. Yeah, I did that a season or two, the Polar Plunge 5K in town. And I've been involved in some other events as well, whether it's the Avera Race for the Cure, similar 5Ks. I think that's just a wonderful opportunity for you to get out, move your body, connect with people in the community, and ideally maybe raise some money or donate your time to a good cause. I think that's the two camps of conversation: service to self versus service to others. And ideally, I generally feel better when I'm in that latter camp of service to others. You need to take care of your own needs as well, your kind of pyramid of needs. The metaphor of fasten your own oxygen mask first, I think is valuable, and one needs to do that to take care of their own needs, to be able to help others. But what I really learned, I think, from those experiences is that, again, it just does feel so much better and helps me align kind of internally and externally when you're being of service, when you're donating your time maybe to a good cause, and finding something that's symbiotic. Maybe it's something where you're able to do something good for the world and also potentially symbiotically advance your current position, whether that's professionally or what have you. A lot of the times, whether it's this last week through SME, Sales Marketing Excellence in town, donating some time to the furniture mission, even just last week. And it felt really good to connect with people, help people moving furniture and these types of things for maybe folks who are disabled or can't walk or move these things, and being able to help them out and feeling really good about that. But then also connecting with people in the community that maybe, oh, you work in this industry, I'm interested in that, and being able to create a dialogue. And maybe that doesn't immediately turn into an opportunity, but I feel like it helps you grow and learn. And that was the ultimate takeaway from some of those volunteering experiences, whether it's the Special Olympics or a Avera Race for the Cure 5K or the furniture mission or even the banquet in town. Just I think it feels, I don't know if we're inherently wired this way, but I personally just feel better when you're you're making a positive impact, donating your time, and just being open to new experiences, not closing yourself off. As a younger person, I think there's been times where it's easy to kind of drain your social battery. Maybe that's in a service industry or something like sales, where it's really easy to encounter maybe even hundreds or more of different people a day, and that can maybe whittle away at you.
A lot.
Right, sure. Versus maybe the post-COVID world of a lot of remote work, where then you go to working at home and not seeing very many people, and then you're at the grocery store striking up a conversation with a sweet old lady, like you just because you're trying to get that connection. So it's kind of being honest with yourself at maybe where your levels are, and that almost pendulum swinging. I feel like I can be a bit of an extrovert at times, but that is only if I can balance that with the introverted times of reading, of sitting quietly and having some of those soul searching times, and being able to, take care of your personal needs so that you can better be available and open to other people, to other opportunities. And you probably gathered this from me when we were at CultureCon, Think 3D. That's where we met a few months ago, a local event in town, and kind of their networking social hour. And it was, how would I put it? It's, if you close yourself off to things or don't connect with people, it's like, what the possibilities are. It's this internal system. But when you open yourself up to these other systems, when you open yourself up to other conversations and possibilities, it does truly become a little bit more of an exponential and maybe even endless conversation of possibilities. And I just think that's just more my value system the older I get. And like I said, it hasn't necessarily always been that way. We're all a work in progress, and I'm not saying one way is better than the other, but I just find this makes me feel like I'm living a more actualized existence. And it's, it's Midwest. It's we've got a lot of really good people. It feels good to make other people feel good, to make other people feel heard, whether that's in the service industry or what have you, striking up a conversation, having a real human moment, and getting past the baseline transactional nature of so many things in this world. So yeah, a little perspective on my thoughts there.
I'm so amazed. Like when I first met you, we asked each other what we did, and a few other questions. But speaking of exponential, like the more we talk, the more exponential your life seems, and how you interact with people, and how you interact with opportunities. Now I'm going to ask you about two things that kind of seem like opposites in your life, but then we'll talk more about how they blend together. But what do you love about hunting and fishing?
Sure. The older I get, the more my value system aligns with sustainable food sources, with supporting local businesses and local producers and these types of things. And so, and to just boil it down, I really just enjoy being out in nature. So I feel like it's almost a 3 or more fold conversation of all of these things aligning. That's something I was going to resonate on slightly earlier, which was being in alignment, your thoughts, your words, your actions. And if one of those is out of alignment, I feel like it's really easy to just feel like you're living a bit of a topsy-turvy existence, or feel very confused at times, or disgruntled. And that hasn't served me the best in the past. So I find, honesty and integrity is just the cornerstone at this stage. And to get it back to hunting and fishing and camping and hiking and nature and what have you, I just feel like we are natural beings of this world. And I feel like I personally feel a lot better when I'm getting natural sunlight, when I'm eating whole foods, that, the very short ingredient list and these types of things, especially when it's supporting a local farmer or something like that. It's, not a massive conglomerate corporation, though those have their places as well, from a population standpoint. But especially being blessed, being in the Midwest around so many pockets of wonderful local producers, whether that's for farming and gardening, whether that's for raising sustainable, ethically and ecologically sound animals and what have you. I get local eggs from Berrybrook Farms, the Ortman family, wonderful people. And you feel good knowing that I'm helping to pay their bills and pay for their kids' lessons and these types of things, as opposed to padding dividends and things like that for a larger corporation. Like I said, and not to demonize that or say it doesn't have its place, it does. But if I do have a choice, I'd rather support some of those local folks. I come from, I'm not sure if we had touched, maybe this is a similarity, but I come from farming stock on the St. Cloud, Minnesota side, my mother's side, as well as more that Osseo, Eau Claire, Wisconsin side, my father's side. And so I think getting more in touch with those roots, the sustainable sources, and also specifically from, say, a hunting and fishing perspective, a lot of that comes down to connection and community as well. Maybe after having some grandparents pass away on my father's side, you find it's harder and harder to keep everybody connected. So if that's something that I can do that's symbiotic, it's something I want to do, it's an activity, it's something I feel good supporting and sustaining local wildlife and keeping things in balance, because that is so key. And also I'm able to connect with cousins and uncles and these types of things. And I think it's really just symbiotic in so many different ways. And again, like I'd mentioned, Berrybrook Farms or Svec Farms, Hudson Meats, Renner, these types of things, just all of these local operations where getting a little closer to the source. And not only do you appreciate, you can have a conversation with them and they can tell you, oh, we're not certified this or that, but this is what we do and this is what we don't do. Maybe it's, Cherry Rock, and some of these different local operations.
Rock, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a great place to go for a hike. It's also wonderful for getting like local produce and these types of things, the farmers markets. I have a lot of friends who have started local businesses that try to just use sustainable packaging, whether that's glass versus plastic, whether that's trying to support local producers, even like Bredico in town being a perfect example. A lot of their flour is milled in South Dakota. It's just, again, you feel better supporting those local decentralized platforms, or at least I personally do. And it just really aligns with my value system. And also I just physically feel better. I feel like when it's a short ingredient list, I know what's going into it. I know what's not going into it. And it makes you also value and appreciate your food, being part of the process. Again, whether that's hunting or fishing or raising animals or getting your own chickens. That would be a goal of mine someday, have a chicken coop in the backyard or something. And that conversation of being a good steward and in balance and doing things ethically and ecologically sound. I've heard that when it comes to all sorts of those food sources, like it heals the earth and it heals your body, especially when we're talking about, ethically sourcing things. Regenerative farming is a big one these days when you're talking about permaculture and what have you, finding a way to do what's good for the soil, for the earth, for the local ecosystem, and for your body and for the local community as well. Even from a business perspective, again, decentralizing those platforms and empowering people to create something and create a living for themselves. I think that's just really kind of beautiful and cool. And it's nice to be part of that process. So whether it's a few weeks ago going to Wisconsin and St. Cloud for that matter and doing ice fishing, and it's also just a good excuse to, you can have some really deep conversations with one of your elders, maybe a grandpa or an uncle or some older cousins or what have you, when you're stoically staring at a hole in the ice for hours. It's like you can really get deep about life and all sorts of things. And so I really appreciated that. And hopefully this summer, maybe just getting reconnected, like I said, with more local friends, family, these types of things when it comes to hunting seasons, and then appreciating it. There's been times in my life where I've been vegetarian or vegan or what have you. The older I've gotten, I think it comes down to just sustainability. So if you are going to support, eating meat or eggs or dairy or what have you, ideally getting it from a local, ethical, and ecologically sound place. Again, just being in alignment with your values and your priorities, and then feeling better physically, mentally, and maybe even spiritually, depending on your value system. So yeah, I appreciate you asking. It's fun to talk about those things.
So I built this as asking you about opposites, but I can already tell they're not opposites. But now please talk about how you got into yoga and became a teacher.
Absolutely. I started, I've always had an older sister who has taught yoga locally. Hannah Tollefson, my older sister at Revolution Yoga and Cycle Studio. She's the lead trainer, coordinates a lot of the workshops and these types of things, kind of audits certain classes. It's great to see that her journey grow. And for me to be a part of that in 2021, I believe I started just practicing at Revolution because I had done some stretches. I used to live in San Antonio for a couple of years, and it would just be beautiful weather. You just go out on your patio. Everybody probably thought I was crazy because it was the middle of winter and I was just, in light clothing, but you get pretty thick skinned being from the Midwest. So if the coldest it gets is like upper 30s, low 40s, that's not so bad to me. So again, just trying to stay physically active, stretching, these types of things. I felt like yoga was something that I'd kind of practice very, not too in depth, kind of almost passively on my own. And then
were you kind of inspired to practice yoga by your older sister?
That was definitely a part of it. For, I feel like, months and maybe even years, she had mentioned, well, hey, I started teaching. Hey, maybe come check this out. It's a good community. It's an excuse to stay physically active. And then I don't know exactly what it was, but the stars just aligned in 2021. And then I found myself going to the studio, really falling in love with not just the practice but also the community. And then continuing to pursue that for the next year. And then in the fall of 2022, I ended up starting the yoga teacher training, which is a 200-hour certification. It's a 6-month process where you have dedicated weekends where pretty much Friday through Sunday, you're there for anywhere from 6 to 8+ hours a day. So it's very intensive on those weekends. And then you have practice hours and reading material and journaling and things like that in between, almost kind of your homework. And it all culminated at the end of that 6 months to actually teaching a class of your own that kind of aligned with your own priorities. So mine was a little more on the restorative side of things. There was still more high energy kind of yoga poses, almost that workout kind of exercise component in the center, but breath work, meditation, these types of things, which I think are just really good for us, regardless of whether you're calling it yoga or prayer or what have you. I just think like being able to sit quietly with yourself and just kind of focus on your system, blocking out the external world. And I don't think that's always just emptying your thoughts in that Zen way. Sometimes it's not thoughtlessness, it's thoughtfulness, like filling yourself up with an idea or being able to hold quiet emotionally and thoughtfully safe time to deep dive into some of those concepts. I feel like sometimes life just moves, a mile a minute sometimes. So being able to, I feel like a lot of people don't have that quiet time until they're staring at the ceiling, ready to fall asleep at the end of the day or something. And so I find that's why I really enjoy those moments, being able to, again, slow down physically, mentally, maybe even spiritually, and being able to just kind of recalibrate and just get
so I hear a lot of people say they get frustrated when they try to meditate and random thoughts that they don't want come up. What do you do in your practice when all sorts of thoughts just come up?
Absolutely. I really appreciate that question. I think that's very pragmatic. Most people deal with that. I try to not be too hard on myself, like in other areas of life as well. I usually see it as almost like visualizing a stream. And sometimes you're going to have certain thoughts like bubble to the surface, or certain thoughts that kind of drift downstream and kind of maybe get in your way or in your sphere, your bubble. And then being able to choose, do I want to engage with this thought? There's probably a reason it's coming up. Or do I want to send it adrift? And being able to hold that almost psychologically safe space for you to do so. I always express that in my classes. It's like, don't sit there and be hard on yourself. Maybe the reason this thought keeps coming up, especially in these safe, quiet, slowed down spaces like a warm, dim yoga room or what have you, or right before bed, maybe the reason it keeps coming up is because it's something you need to deal with, or something that's really subconsciously in turmoil or what have you. And so I think being able to hold space for that, but it really just depends on your value system and what you're trying to get out of that moment in time. Because for some people it's, visualizing, it's like I'm visualizing nature or like a brick wall and I'm blocking out all other thoughts. For me, that often isn't what it is. It's just being open, almost listening to yourself and to maybe something bigger than yourself. and being able to just say, oh, well, if this thought is coming up, how do I want to deal with it? It is always my choice. Do I want to interface with it and deep dive and dissect that and understand better why it does keep coming up? Or is it feeling like distraction or obfuscation? And do I want to just send it adrift? And being able to almost, I think the more you do that and have that quiet time with yourself, I think the more you're able to better assess those things and say, not just down to productivity, but I think that like not just professionally, but like emotionally, there's certain thoughts that come up and you go, is this almost just emotional procrastination? Am I just distracting myself with this because I don't want to deal with this? And being able to be honest with yourself. But a lot of the times in my experience, again, it's not thoughtlessness, it's thoughtfulness, and being able to hold safe spaces for you to deal with those things. And maybe that's thoughtfully, maybe that's emotionally or otherwise. And that's just my experience with it. Everybody's going to be different, but I found that has helped with me. And being able to not take yourself too seriously. I think you can agree with this, Jason, is being able to like laugh at yourself, understand when you do things well, and maybe when you do things not so well, and having some just grace. So it's sometimes I'll realize like, oh, I was trying to focus on this thing or really empty or quiet my mind. And I realized, oh, it's like been 5 minutes and I've just been like wandering, meandering through this odd process or something novel or fantastic or what have you. And then being able to just chuckle it off and say like, okay, do I want to stay in that space or do I want to redirect and steer the ship back? And it's just always your choice. So yeah, not taking yourself too seriously and having some grace. I think that applies to every aspect of our lives.
Yes, I've never heard the term emotional procrastination. I love it.
Yeah.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask a yoga teacher about this. What would you say about the power of intentionally paying attention to the breath? I
Absolutely.
point at my nose for whatever reason. The breath.
Sure. No, there's a funny TV show where there's like, where's your breath? And he's like, it's in my mouth. And she's like, no, it's in like your diaphragm and stuff. And it's like, no, it's that just makes me chuckle. I'm right there with you. It's I think intentionality in all things, being able to set your intention, whether it's before you're sitting down for a meeting or recording a podcast or about to take a yoga class. It's like, what am I wanting to get out of this? In yoga, maybe it's I'm looking for strength or I'm looking for balance or I'm looking for grace and being able to soften and be gentle with myself. Or maybe I'm trying to push myself and go outside of that system and set new personal records or what have you. It really is just, I think intentionality is everything. But so I appreciate you resonating on that. And then just from the breath perspective, there's been so many times in my life where it reminds you of the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic, fight or flight versus rest and digest. And there's times in my life where I feel like, oh, I just got a harsh or slightly caustic, upsetting email through work. And that has just completely thrown my week asunder. And now it's going to be something that's going to be a lot more difficult or a deadline moved up or what have you. And then being able to just slow down and analyze, how is this making me feel? How is it changing my physical processes? My heart rate's up. Maybe I'm sweating a little bit. I'm feeling kind of clammy, and being able to just be honest with yourself. And then maybe just having, I always call it like tools in your tool belt or things in your medicine pouch, like being able to say, cool, so I'm just going to slow down, right? Like maybe being able to close your eyes and just have a moment, like, where's my breath? A lot of the times if I get distracted like that, I feel like I do go into that fight or flight, like a scared, wounded animal where my breath is just in and out through my mouth, very shallow. I'm hardly breathing at all. I feel like the carbon dioxide is, from a biological perspective, building in my system, and I'm feeling hot and just less productive, honestly, less optimized, less actualized. So in those moments, being able to slow down, maybe even close your eyes or quiet your mind, and or if you can't, you're driving and something stressful happens, whatever, it's just like being able to just take a deep breath, like in through your nose, and a nice lengthened exhale through your mouth, and just slowing things down, slowing the heart rate, slowing the breath, and ideally slowing the mind. I feel like when things get erratic and thinking too quickly, especially in a society where maybe we're pushing caffeine and these types of things, I think that definitely has its place. But in moderation, I think for most people, a microdose of these things would be more beneficial than a macro dose of these things. You get that sweet spot where it's like no caffeine. All right, maybe a little bit, and you're able to feel like, okay, we're really ready to get the day. But then you have too much and you can literally feel sick and unproductive.
Yeah.
So again, trying to find that sweet spot, and even in breath work, that can be a thing as well. As there's certain practices where, again, you should do it when you're laying down versus seated up, because you might get a little lightheaded or something like that. And I don't go too much into those, though that is an opportunity for people to feel free to look into it. Pranayama, Wim Hof breathing techniques, all these types of things. I think it's fascinating. It's a real rabbit hole you can go down. But ultimately, I'm more pragmatist at this stage in my life, which is how can I apply this inside that room and outside? I can do hard
How
things in
far
there.
do you try to breathe down to your chest or to your belly? Or?
That is a good distinction. There's a difference. If you're, in my opinion, I think for those stressful situations, trying to breathe into your stomach and expand your diaphragm and slow things down, I think that is usually more beneficial. That's more that rest and digest. But if you're trying to energize and pep up, I've always expressed that it's like, maybe you're pulling an all-nighter because you're in school and you have a presentation, but you don't want to pump the caffeine too hard because you need to sleep earlier or later and you don't want to be overstimulated. So I always had a drumline instructor who would say, like, just get up and like do some jumping jacks, do some push-ups, like get some breathing going, move your body, get the blood flowing, the oxygen flowing, or step outside into the cold air for a minute, like remove yourself from the environment and come back to it. And I feel like that oftentimes just those little things can really help me. So if you're looking for something more invigorating, maybe filling up your chest cavity or heart space, rolling those shoulders back and down, I think that's really invigorating. And like I said, if you need to rest and digest and slow down, breathing into the belly and slowing that down. So like long, deep inhales, slow exhales, maybe even pausing briefly in between. I think that's always really impressed me as well when it comes to breath work, is realizing, like, by no means am I a swimmer or a diver or something, but when you do these breathing patterns, all of a sudden you get surprised by how long one could hold their breath, because you're super oxygenating your tissues and what have you, and just being more efficient with your lungs. I feel like it's almost like that metaphor they say, like, oh, people only usually use however many percent of their brain, 10%, whatever it is. I feel like we use that or less of our lungs. Like usually we're just shallow breathing and not really filling up our lungs and oxygenating our tissues. And so maybe you don't need an extra cup of coffee. Maybe you just need to slow down and take a deep breath or move your body a little bit. I find a lot of the times that just works a lot better for me and has fewer pitfalls and sharp edges, almost tapping into your body's innate ability to self-regulate. I think that's really important, physically, emotionally, and otherwise.
So fascinating, and important. So changing subjects back to performance. What? So sometimes we practice and do perfect practice, very intentional, but on game day or on performance day during the event, we make a mistake. What would you say about making a mistake during a performance and using it in a way that doesn't derail you?
Absolutely. I think especially it makes me think of drumline or what have you, like in the middle, maybe it's in the first 2 minutes of a 12-minute routine and you go, I already goofed, like it's already not a perfect run. I don't think the thing to do is to be hard on yourself, because in those moments, then usually people snowball or the dominoes keep falling and all of a sudden you're making more and more mistakes. You're getting distracted. You're getting in your head. You're losing
I'm
that.
laughing because I've done that snowball thing before.
I think we all have. I think we all can agree with that one. And so I think that's a big part of it, is being able to try to get back into that flow zone, that sweet spot, if you will. You hear that in athleticism, you hear it in musical performance, you maybe hear it in other professional areas too, where you almost lose yourself in the doing, almost like I've expressed earlier, getting out of the way, like just not overcomplifying things, just or overcomplicating things and complexifying sometimes to a detrimental perspective. Being able to say, like, I've done the preparation, I've got the muscle memory, and now it is just a matter of me mentally not getting in the way of that, just letting it do what it needs to do. And but I do think that's difficult, is because you can kick yourself out of that flow zone, that sweet spot, because of a mistake or an error. I think the important thing is, again, maybe if you have the presence of mind and body, and obviously it was difficult. I was a drumline person, but there are people who are playing wind instruments and horns and these types of things. So being able to slow down and take a deep breath, that might not be available for them because they're playing an entire piece of music. So for them, I would say, whatever you got to do, I'm less familiar with that. But yeah, being able to take a deep breath and just get back into that sweet spot, brush it off. I always express just submitting yourself to the experience. And after the experience, by all means, crunching the numbers, saying, what's the data? Here were my opportunities to do better. Here's what I did incredibly well. And just taking that back to the drawing board so you can make it better for the next time. But in that moment, trying to just get right back into the sweet spot or the zone. Because I think lingering on those faults, in my experience, typically leads to more faults. So it's a touch of grace and just a touch of presence of mind. And all of these things, of course, are so much easier said than done. But that's why they call it practice. Like whether it's a yoga practice or whether it's, performing or what have you, or presenting in a professional capacity, just being able to say, I can't control everyone else. All I can do is control myself, and not being too self-deprecating to that extent, but just saying, this is all fuel for the fire. This is all me taking this, crunching those numbers, analyzing the data, maybe getting outside perspective. I think that's really great from a performance perspective, as well as being able to have, again, more data, a recording, whether that's a recording of your musical performance, whether that's a recording of a podcast or a presentation that you give professionally, and being able to go back and say, I'm sure I'll be doing that later when I'm reviewing this, and saying, oh, got to watch out for those filler words, David, or what have you, or those space fillers, because we all have them, and not being too hard on yourself.
Ironically, I haven't detected that you've used any fill words.
We'll try to stay in the sweet spot. I can't get the speed wobbles now. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's interesting how that works, though. I feel like we can apply so many of these things, again, whether that's musical or athletic performance or professional presentation and coordination. I feel like being able to find those things that work for you and apply it to every area of your life. And the older I get, the more I just find that is the case. There's not hard lines between these areas of our lives and these defined borders. It's all just human experience. And being able to utilize that, again, whether it's personally, professionally, financially, what have you, I think that a lot of those deep universal truths and good sound wisdom can apply to every aspect of your life, and can be scalable. If you do something well small, you can usually do well at a larger capacity. You might need to scale it appropriately. There might be some pitfalls that arise, because anything that you're going to scale is not going to scale perfectly 1x, then 10x, or what have you. But being able to, again, have some grace and just being analytical and discerning enough to be able to understand the difference between those things. But if you can't do something well small, I don't think you have much of a chance to do something well at a larger scale. And whether that's, again, a business or relationships or communication or performance or what have you, I think that scalability of just existence and experience, in my opinion, tends to resonate in all aspects of my life. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that's very well said. Very well said.
Thank you.
I ask all my guests this. In my business, I talk about the power of doing our imperfect best, and what it means to me is I have an idea of the best I want for myself in the world in my mind, and I go for it. But when imperfections come up, mistakes come up, obstacles come up, instead of being stopped by them, I try to learn from them and move once again forward towards what I envision. What does doing your imperfect best mean to you, David?
I appreciate that. It makes me think of a few phrases. One being, what is it? People say the devil's in the details. I kind of prefer the magic's in the margins. I think that sounds
the magic's in the margins.
These types of things. But yeah, I think we are imperfect beings, and that's the beauty of humanity. If we were all the same and unilateral and what have you, that would not be very interesting or exciting. So I think the imperfections make you who you are, but being able to understand when you want to better that, and being able to accept when, oh, that's just something that I do and that's okay, or and maybe it's not okay and I don't like it and I want to change it. I've heard that this year, challenging your personal mythologies and the stories you tell yourself, being able to say like, oh, I'm bad at this thing or I'm good at this thing. It's like, well, where does that come from? Was that formed when you were in school and maybe you didn't have the best teacher, or maybe you weren't very focused on what you were doing at the time and weren't very passionate about it? So being able to challenge those things, and even your own personal beliefs and ideas, the idea that if you don't understand why you believe a thing, it's most likely not your belief, it's somebody else's, and you're just parroting that. And so being able to be not too critical, but just being discerning and analyzing. And so doing your imperfect best, or kind of living your imperfect life, I think that's just the journey, which is to be able to understand and love the process, and enjoy yourself. I think that's a thing that people don't talk about enough these days, which is being able to, yes, we're trying to be better, but, and especially for people who are maybe more pragmatic or self-deprecating, because I can't control others, all I can do is control myself, so I need to be better, I need to be better. Absolutely, rising to the occasion, trying to bolster that baseline standard, I think that's really important. But also, again, having some personal grace and an idealistic value system that can help you navigate those spaces. And again, a lot of it, I think, comes down to preparation. You hear that whether it's in a relationship or what have you, any type of relationship, whether it's friendship, family, maybe romance or marriage or what have you, the idea of it is not always going to be perfect. So what safeguards and protocols do you have in place to navigate those types of things? You know, being able to,
It's not always going to be perfect. So what safeguards and protocols do you have in place to navigate those things? It's a great line.
thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's a good takeaway, because I think that just does resonate with so many aspects of life, and we're all going to have emotional highs and emotional lows. It almost makes me think of an old George Harrison lyric, all things must pass. And that kind of resonates with some of that Stoic idealism and philosophy, which is to be able to say, to be consistent, and to be able to say, if I'm in a low point, I can utilize this to pick myself back up. If I'm in a high point, maybe I can use it to temper with some realism, and not to deflate your happiness by no means, but be able to understand that in my experience, usually I am best when the pendulum's not aggressively swinging, when I have sound, focusable energy right down the center in the sweet spot. And so that, again, that all things must pass kind of reminds me, whether it's during hardship and low times in your life or during high times. And I think also it doesn't deflate in those high times. It's a reminder that all things must pass. So cherish this while it's here, whether that's a relationship with a person, maybe an elder or relative that you're not going to have around forever. Cherish that time. And also maybe a time when you're sick or going through hardship, understanding this can't last forever. I can visit here. I don't want to live here. It reminds me of in jujitsu, when, you're getting, squashed by somebody who's like 50 pounds heavier than you, and things are getting red and hot and the carbon dioxide's building in your system, and it's difficult to expand and breathe and these types of things, and being able to say like, okay, slow down. I don't want to live here, but I can visit. I can do hard things in here and out there, and being able to just, again, temper your reality with that internal dialogue, with that process. And I think that's just the goal long term, is being able to, like we said, in your tool belt or your medicine pouch or what have you, things that you can lean on and utilize for when things do get hard, and also things that maybe you can temper yourself with to appreciate when things are going really well. That's just my general thought on that.
So David, I'm entirely amazed. Like we met each other, and we began by talking about your work and a little of my work. And if we had stopped that, I wouldn't have learned in the Awkwardly Awesome podcast listeners wouldn't have learned so much about. You've learned philosophy and practicality and performance and stories, and it's so rich. It's a reminder to me, and I hope a reminder to all of us that we are really complex, intricate beings, each and every one of us, and to ask each other more questions, deeper questions, and to also share more dimensions of ourselves than just the surface. What do you do and stuff?
Yeah.
So thank you.
I'm thank you so much. I appreciate this platform, and it does remind me of that conversation even at CultureCon when we met. People will say, "What do you do?" And sometimes that warrants another question, which is, in what aspect of my life are we expressing this? Like, what do I do for hobbies? What do I do professionally? What do I do for matters of, the heart, passions, labors of love, these types of things? And so that tapestry, that weave of life, that broad bandwidth that as you've mentioned in the past, I think is really empowering. And it's easier to connect those dots looking backwards than looking forward. Sometimes as a young person looking forward and saying, what's this landscape? But again, when you're turning a new chapter in life, examining the previous chapters and saying, oh, all of these experiences led me to this. My experience here helped me when I got to this position. You'd mentioned like handyman from a sales perspective, and that was laying a baseline for then maybe working in more sales at Verizon, and then being in a Google specialist position through MarketStar and coordinating Best Buy locations regionally, and then eventually being like an Apple service care and support and sales representative, and then and now we're at Interstates designing and drafting control panels and getting more into the design managing side of things and coordinating projects and what have you. And maybe the next adventure, whether that's more sales, marketing, what have you. And that's again just within that lane of professionalism. So it is just, I think it is a beautiful reminder to not limit ourselves. Like I said, having that can do versus that can't do, surrounding yourself with people that inspire you to be better and that also challenge you. I think that's really important. We don't want to create echo chambers for ourselves. We want people who can shoot straight, if you will, and sometimes maybe even be blunt when we need it in our life to help us better ourselves and better each other. And ultimately, I think that's the goal.
Well, thanks so much for your time, David. Thanks for your preparation and thanks for your wisdom and for the life you're living. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, I appreciate you doing this. This was such a blessing. And yeah, I'd love to do it again. I can't wait to go on a walk or a hike this spring as weather gets nicer. Thanks again.
Yeah, I'm excited too. Thank you. And thanks everyone for tuning into this Awkwardly Awesome podcast. Please leave questions or comments if you have them. We love those. And tune in for another amazing guest next week. Thank you, and thanks for being you.